Welcome back to the Contacts Coaching Podcast. We're joined today by Vinay Mullick, who is a entrepreneur in the current space, but a former AD, former teacher, former and current coach in the space. But thanks for jumping on today. Appreciate having you here.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Happy to be here. Looking forward to chatting.
All right, let's dive in. Why don't you take us through the background and the journey and how you landed in the coaching space and ultimately became an AD and a teacher, just a path along the way that led to that iteration of your journey.
Sure, for sure. Yeah, so unique background. So I'm actually just based outside of Chicago, born and raised in the western suburbs out here. Actually went to school for engineering. So I'm an industrial engineer by degree, proud Northern Illinois University alum. Got to be there for a handful of years as an engineer out of college. Had an engineering job. I worked for Intel actually. So I was working at Intel on the East Coast, which is a little unique because most people think of Intel on the West Coast. Worked in manufacturing, enjoyed the work, but didn't love the work. Didn't love being in a position where I wasn't being able to build equity in people. And that was something that I was able to do as an undergrad through a variety of different activities and different initiatives I was part of. So after that sort of realization of corporate engineering wasn't where I needed to be and what I needed to do, went on this journey of trying to figure out what that was. And so in that process, there was three things that kind of stuck out to me. It was education, entrepreneurship, and sports. About 2 years out of college, I was like, all right, I know this isn't for me. What do I want to do? And then these last kind of 20 plus years, good ways out of college here, but no problem. And with that, I've been on that journey of figuring out education, sports, entrepreneurship. And the quick segue was I've always been an entrepreneur. I've owned a franchise restaurant. I used to own a web design company. I do work with mini jerseys now in the athletic apparel space and licensing and NIL. So that vertical has always been going in my life and it's always been the background no matter where I'm at. But I really wanted to get into education and coaching full time. So I did a program called Teach for America, a national teaching program that puts you in districts that have teacher shortages or have need in schools of need. And need can mean a variety of different things to whoever that might be. But in my situation, the school that I was at needed math teachers. And I was a former engineer with a lot of math. So I was able to transition into a high school math role at Paul Robeson High School in Chicago on Chicago's South Side in the Inglewood community. So I taught there for 3 years. I coached anything I could, basketball, football, helped the track, helped with baseball. Again, I didn't play any of those sports in high school. I was a high school tennis player, but I played a ton of basketball growing up. And I probably had my most coaching experience there, so I gravitated towards that the most, in addition to a bunch of work that I had done with the football program, more on an athletic sort of compliance side. In that journey, taught for 3 years there. I also taught a pre-engineering course, taking me back to my engineering roots, which was a lot of fun. Again, in the Chicago public schools, in the thick of it, lots going on at that time. School reform, school change. There was just a lot going on in Chicago. There still is. So I did that for 3 years. After that, I got into a role at Perspectives Charter Schools, which is a network of 5 charter schools here in Chicago. And the big thing I learned at Paul Robeson High School was that athletic administration was something that really intrigued me and interested me. And I was doing that kind of on the part-time, as a part-time thing at the school, supporting different programs with compliance. We had a handful of kids go Division 1, Division 2, Division 3, and I was the one that made the numbers all come together in terms of the NCAA clearinghouse at the time. I think it's called the Eligibility Center now, right? So doing a lot of that, and then I was like, I need to look at my next role and if I could be more still supporting kids during the school day, but looking for exposure to them outside the classroom and how to do that. Was it with student activities, whether it was work-based learning or whether it was athletics? That was looking for my next role. So I got lucky, to be honest with you, where a lot of AD jobs, those don't open up regularly. And when they do, there are lots of people that want those jobs, even though they are the toughest jobs in the building. And they're not also they're rewarding in a lot of ways, but in the moment, it's tough, as we all know. So with that, Prospective Charter Schools interviewed for a position there. It wasn't an AD job. Went through the interview process, and they kept saying, "You keep talking about sports. You keep talking about sports. You want to coach. Well, we're thinking about forming a network athletic director job. Would you be interested in that?" And I didn't hesitate, and I said, "Yep, I'm in. So let's do it." And obviously, if they needed me, and so at that time, we were 3 schools. This was 2007, and we were going to grow to 5. So I think when I started, we probably had about 12, 1,300 students. By the time I left, we were closer to 2,100 students across 5 buildings, all on the south side of Chicago. By the time I left, we had a student go through our hallways by the name of Anthony Davis, right? So that was a pretty interesting story. Like Anthony's freshman year at Perspectives was my first year as the AD. He had been there for at least 1, maybe 2 years before that because we had a 6 through 12 model. So Anthony had gotten there in 7th grade, 7th, 8th, and then my first year was his year as a 9th grader. So yeah, that's been the journey. Was an AD for 9 years, loved it. Hardest job I ever had, I probably will ever have, but also the most rewarding. When I was at a time in my life where I could do that. My kids, I started that job, I wasn't married, got married, started having kids. My kids were still pretty young. And as my kids were getting older, that was where like I had a decision to make, where it was like, hey, if I want to be around my kids more, I want to coach them, which is very important to me, then I needed to transition out of that position in the network I was in and being in the inner city of Chicago, where you mix a lot of these different things together. Work-life balance isn't always there, right? So that was the journey through athletics. And again, I loved being an AD, still talk very passionately about it. I still do professional development at times, still talk and work with a lot of ADs, but I'm on the outside looking in now. So
How did you transition post AD world into, I don't know, let's call it the private space that you're in now? Talk a little bit about that, how the experience being an athletic director has served you as you've entertained these other entrepreneurial ideas. And I don't know if it's corporate or not, but you can describe,
yeah,
what you do there.
yeah, for sure. So yeah, the role that when I left Perspectives, I went to a startup company called Sport Up, which is also called at that time was Sport Up. Now it's called Upmetrics. Still there, almost 9 years in the fall. So really excited to be here and be part of the team in terms of what we're doing. And with Upmetrics, what we're doing is we're bringing a lens of impact data to the social sector. So we're working with nonprofits, philanthropy. We used to work with schools a lot as it relates to helping them use data to better serve and push their mission along to bring resources back to the work that they're doing. And so, in terms of how I got here and with my entrepreneurial spirit and kind of all those things I have going on, is being an AD, in my opinion, the best ADs are the ADs that attack that job like an entrepreneur. And in essence, you're running a business within a business. So a lot of times, some school leaders have their hands all over athletics and get all in the AD's work, and some just stay away. And no matter what and somewhere in the middle, and depending on where you're at and your type of personality and your work style, for me, I was left alone a lot because I was across 5 schools. I reported to the CEO of our network, and I also reported to our principals, but in a roundabout manner. So they all let athletics go, and the only time that we really had to navigate big things was when maybe things were going really good, or things weren't going so well, and how we had to fix that. So for me, I knew I wouldn't be in that job forever. I just knew that based on the velocity that you had to move to do that job effectively, but to really give my student athletes and the coaches and the community the support that they needed. I just knew I couldn't do that forever. So with that, being an entrepreneur, I just always had my eyes and ears open. Vendors are coming in, talking to them. What are they doing? How are you doing it? Meeting other schools, meeting other administrators, going to the conferences, right? I always look at the national conference as a great opportunity to see what's going on in terms of innovation in the world of sports, just of youth sports and K-12 sports and interscholastic athletics. Like those conferences, regardless if you go to classes or not, and you're just in the vendor hall, like that's innovation. So I always having your eyes and ears open, thinking entrepreneurially, knowing that there's some people nowadays that do retire as an AD, but I do think that's less and less, just like it is with coaching. We see less and less coaches coaching for their entire career. We see many coaches leaving early to either they can't, what's the right word? They're exhausted, right? And they can't continue at this pace to adhere to a lot of the issues that we're having in youth sports and expectations on coaches to coach, teach, parent, counsel, all those different things. I did that with ADs as well. For me, I always knew there would be a time where I would leave and maybe I would do something else and come back. So who knows if that will ever happen. But I think for me, again, it was just knowing that I wouldn't be here forever in the role, but valuing those moments and then always thinking through what could be next. whether it was, again, meeting through vendors, going to conferences, being in Chicago, and being in Chicago during a time when President Obama left Chicago to go to DC and still did a lot in Chicago during those times, and him being a very youth sports uh, centered and just advocate. There was a lot of things going on here in Chicago as related to youth sports, and this exposure that I got to different people I got to meet, just always keeping those doors open, those communication lines open. Networking is a big part of it because you never know. There's a lot of coaches that I hired that now can hire me in various roles that they have, right? And I might have been their first hiring manager some 15 years ago. So it's just keeping those lines and your eyes and ears open as you go.
How would you say that your time in Teach for America prepared you for the role of both coaching and being an athletic director? I don't necessarily think, let me rephrase this, that is more of a non-traditional path than what most
Sure.
people end up in the teaching profession, right? It's a huge
Yeah,
organization, but it's a fraction of the number of people in education, right? But how would you say that
100%.
sets you up for success?
Yeah, for me, I was at a time in my career where like I had worked as I'd been out of school for 4 years when I got into TFA and started. And I wanted a way to teach in schools that I was passionate about working in and communities that I wanted to work in. But it would have been really hard for me to go back to school for 2 full years, do student teaching. So you started to explore alternative certification. And so Teach for America was something that I had friends of friends that did it and learned about it, followed a couple paths and got there. So for me, the network and the resource and the support system that I had during my matriculation and my student teaching and those 2 years where I was still doing coursework was phenomenal, right? A lot of like-minded folks, a lot of folks at the same point in life, same point in the career. I was a little older at that point because I had done 4 years, where at that point, most of the TFA teachers or core members were straight out of college, but we weren't that far apart, even though they loved to remind me about that. I was still like, hey, I'm only 4 years older. I'm not 40 years older. That was a joke. I think for me, it provided you that extra motivation at times when you needed it, because it's not easy. It's not easy to have a shorter amount of student teaching. I did my student teaching at Locke High School in Compton in South LA, then came back to Chicago and started my teaching here relatively quickly, going to night school Saturdays and trying to coach and try to be part of a school community. That's a lot. So for me, it was the community and the resources and the mentorship and leadership that I had around me to be like, look, I did this in New Orleans, I did this in Philly, I did this in DC, Vinay, I did this in Chicago. You could do it. And so for me, my we had what was called I think it was called a core member advisor at the time, who was with us at Locke High School. She taught in Chicago, and luckily she taught at the high school that I went to. So I lucked out, and she was a math teacher. So she really looked out for me that summer because we were everything that not everyone in my cohort had that luxury. They were in Houston, they were in St. Louis, they were in Philly, they were in wherever. So I was really lucky to have really good supports with her name was Tanya Maloney, with Tanya to help me through that process. And then she was at the school when I got there. So I was like, hey, sequencing as a teacher is really hard that first year. How do you know what to teach 40 weeks every day? And you get the curriculum, but it doesn't always add up. And we all know that. So it's like, how do you sequence this appropriately? So again, so for me, TFA, not to be too long-winded, the support system, that mentorship, that leadership, and then a couple of those support folks that we had around us were super just resourceful and really motivated you to continue to get out there and do your best.
Yep. And then as you transition into the classroom and then you're
Yeah.
coaching multiple sports that you never played, talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that and how that informed your ability to help be resourceful as you navigated the rest of your professional journey. Because it's like, hey, come coach water polo. Dude, I don't even get in the pool. What are you talking about? So talk
Yeah.
a little bit about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, it was Chicago Public League sports. Definitely basketball was something I grew up just at some point as a West suburban kid in Chicago. Um, the Chicago Public League clicked with me, but I just would follow it, right? This was before Twitter and social and all that. So we're talking old school Chicago Tribune, Chicago Sun-Times, just reading about folks. And I was very involved with our athletic program at my high school. I was a varsity tennis player, but a lot of my friends played basketball and football. And it was just a big part of who I was growing up, being either competing in the sports I competed in, but or supporting my friends in my school in the sports they did. So for me, once I got into teaching, I knew I wanted to coach. And that first month or two, I met as many of the head coaches that I could and be like, hey, I heard you coach this. If you need any help, I'd love to help you. And quite honestly, some coaches look at you like you're crazy. Just, I don't need you. You're good. And some coaches look at you like, you can help, but I have no money for you. Because a lot of times you get 3 stipends and they're taking. I'm like, look, I will coach for free. I just want to coach. And so I went through all these different folks. And I also don't look a lot like a lot of teachers in the schools I work in and or the community, so I'm new in a lot of different ways. And so finally, one of my colleagues, he would help do supervision and security on the floor that I worked that I taught on the third floor. And so he was the freshman basketball coach. So one day he said to me, he was like, hey, looks like you're doing a pretty good job. You got good classroom management because management was an issue with a lot of teachers at that school. So I'm like, hey, man, I'm just trying. Like, I'm a first year teacher. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm trying. And then we come to find out he's a basketball coach. I was like, hey, his name's Larry Dawson. We're still close friends to this day. And through Larry's, hey, if you want to coach, you could coach, but I got no money for you. I was like, don't worry about it. I'm in. And so I was the third coach on the freshman team. We had another guy that had been there the year before. His name was Nick. So Larry, Nick, and I coached freshman basketball, and that's where it all started. And so from there, I think other people in the building were like, okay, new teacher is out here coaching. He is giving his time. And a lot of times, new teachers in a lot of inner city schools are not known for longevity and staying. It's 2 years and out, 3 years and out, shoot, 6 weeks and out. I mean, let's be frank, we've seen it. So for that, I think once people around me started to see that they didn't know me, that hey, he's here, he's putting in work. And of course, I was doing a lot. I was doing fundraisers, I was writing grants, I was doing a lot of the things off the court that when you have 3 coaches, you can do. When you have one coach with a lot of freshman basketball programs might, you don't do because you don't have time. So we were able to do a lot there that caused that a lot of people noticed. And then through that, it was like, hey, Mullick, hey, can you help me with this? Hey, Vinay, can you help me with this? And then that organically. And then the next year, the football guys were like, hey, I need you over at football. And it was nice. I had a bunch of I had a bunch of students I started with in 10th, when they were 10th graders my first year teaching. And you want to say I looped with them. So I had them for 3 years. And most of those young men were football players. I'm still in touch with a handful of them. And it was a very talented group in the classroom and on the field. So there's a lot to work with there because there's just a lot you can take, these young men can do because they're eligible for money to go pre-NIL days. They're eligible for money to attend school. So the football gravitation for me was actually very logical and very easy because instead of just having 15 kids and let's say a third of them could play at the next level, we had 50 kids and we had more than that. We had a really good handful that were getting looks. So there was a while schools were coming through Illinois, Northern Illinois, Purdue, Stanford, Notre Dame, and looking at our kids. And they, in addition to coaches, football guys, they enjoyed talking to me at times. Not everybody did. I'll be frank about that because they're like, what are you doing here? But a lot of times coaches would bring me in and be like, hey, Vinay, let's talk eligibility. You take care of eligibility. And I would do that. And then took kids to camps and did a lot of different stuff. That sort of journey of getting in freshman basketball. And then over the next 3 years, doing everything, it was pretty cool, pretty special time and something I'm really grateful for. So.
Yeah. And on that note, I feel like the way you described your experience of just doing more and being around is
Yeah.
how I think our generation cut their teeth. And I feel like what I've run into now, not here per se, but just as we're out there in community, is I don't want to call it an aversion, but it's not like people are wired the way that we were. And it's just, yeah, you need me to coach this. I was coaching three varsity sports every year for 5 years, right? Now it's
Yeah.
just how do you increase your points of contact with your students so that number one, you have more credibility, but also there's a need, right?
Yep.
How would you say that you have seen that evolution as a parent now, as your
Yep.
kids are going through things, right? As a professional in another workspace, and how would you advise people trying to cut their teeth in coaching or athletic administration as to the best way to make your mark?
Yeah, that's a good question because it's competitive. There's some people got it and some people don't. I know that's a strong statement, but I think that's just factual. Going back to my experience, what I would say was humility and asking questions and like just being genuine. For me, it was like I'm in a new community. I wouldn't call myself a fish out of water because I was comfortable, but if you visually looked at it, I definitely was a fish out of water. But in that, I was confident in who I was, but I was humble in who I was, and I was also measured in what I brought into the community. You know what I mean? And I think if you're thoughtful, and maybe and measured might not be the right word, maybe it's more thoughtful. I was more thoughtful about what I was doing. And I was also very thoughtful that I'm not from that community and I'm probably not going to be living here long term. So I'm here for a couple years and I'm going to do what I can to support whoever I can, whether it was my students, my student athletes, my peers, or even community members, depending on what was going on and what initiative we could have been working on as a school or even as like a team. And that was my approach. And it was definitely not about me, right? It was not, and I've had this conversation. I haven't talked about this much, but I do a ton of youth sports coaching right now for my kids. And you see it all the time is you see there's a ton of me coaches. There's not a lot of we coaches, right? And I didn't really think of that term till recently, till a basketball organization that I coach with. They always talk about we over me. And that's really resonated with me this last year or two with this new organization I'm with. But like, in that journey, I was definitely like a we coach. Even though I went to a large West suburban public high school, overly functional, overly resourceful, and then I end up at potentially one of the most poverty-stricken schools in America, trying to emulate what I had in high school with crime, with no money, with uncertainty of where children are sleeping at night and coming to school or where they're getting their next meal, right? But I took that and try to strive for that with our young people, but in a very humble manner. And so that to me, I think just having that ability to be grounded, but be confident in yourself and knowing your surrounding, but just rolling up your sleeves and just getting it done, I think is pretty important.
Talk more about the idea of a me coach versus a we coach and how you see that and how you would, I don't know, let's say look to hire, how you would
Sure.
advise growth in regards to some of these people looking for jobs.
Yeah, a lot of times there's professions out there that where you're hired to build other people up, right? You are hired to be there for others and be that sort of crutch, excuse me, be that leader, be that support network for them. And they come before you. Obviously, we all work to make a living, to put food on our tables, to support our loved ones, keep the lights on. And that's why we're there too, right? I get it. But and you want to have that intrinsic value, that intrinsic motivation to get what you need to get done and support others. And I think that idea of understanding in these roles, they're bigger than you. And yeah, it might not be the way you learned it growing up, or you feel that you need to do these things, or the way you need to instruct how to pull a ground ball, or to field a ground ball, or to pitch a ball, or to hit a baseball, hit a softball. And it might not be that way that it's being taught right now, and that's okay. Even though it might not be fully aligned with what you were taught and what you believe, right now, for the betterment of the team or the program, this is what we're doing. And you need to get on board and do that. And I think a lot of times coaches get too caught up in what they know and what they want and what they think is best. And this is going to be a strong statement to put them on a pedestal instead of their athletes. So I think that idea of you're there for your athletes, you're not there for yourself. And I can tell you some of my greatest feelings right now are coaching my kids. And I feel awesome on certain weekends. And this is regardless of wins or losses. It just depends on situational, whatever it might be. Don't get me wrong. Wins and losses and stats definitely help, right? Don't get me wrong there. But those are some of the best feelings I have is to coach them. And so it makes me feel good, but I also know that I'm there for a bigger cause. And I'm not just there for my kid. I'm there for my kid plus 9. I'm for my kid plus 10. I'm there for my kid plus 80, depending on the leagues. Again, to that question, and not to go too far down a tangent, is understanding why you're there, and coaching and teaching and athletic administration is a profession to build up and support others. And if you are not comfortable doing that, you need to get comfortable doing that to stay in the profession to be happy. And if you are not comfortable with it, with who you are, that's okay. Work towards figuring that out while you lift others around you, because that's why you're there. right? And so for my big thing, I think as you get into any of those fields is just being big about lifting those around you up, and supporting them, worrying about your ego later. And if you do all those things right with your young people around, um, you're going to get your roses at some point and you'll be fine, or you'll get your flowers at some point. You'll be good if you need those, and go from there.
Yeah, that's a rabbit hole we can go down, and
Yeah, yeah,
that's a whole show on itself. But let me
sure.
pivot back to this. As you stepped out of the classroom into athletic administration
Yeah,
and you were the network AD, right? So you weren't necessarily at a school site, but it's okay, I'm overseeing these three schools plus the two we're going to add. What did
sure.
you realize right away that you needed to figure out, even with your background in the classroom? You had spent 4 years in corporate culture, right? You felt ready. What did you realize right away that was like, oh my goodness, what did I get myself into?
That managing adults is terrible. So that's a strong statement. But there's two things. It was really interesting. It was like the student athletes weren't giving me the issues. It was that going into a job of athletic administration, and that was a just comment. I think there was two things, right? I didn't realize because I'd never been in management. I had owned a small restaurant prior, so I managed a couple like folks maybe 10 years younger than me, but a lot of folks like in high school. So it wasn't like a very traditional setting, and it was a year and a half we did that. So this is my first time managing folks either older than me at my age or younger than me, but obviously out of school. And I think the hardest part of that I had to get used to was managing complex personalities and unique personalities. To be outside the just comment about managing adults is terrible, but it is just like the idea of managing people. And sports brings out a different thing, like athletic coaching, managing folks in an athletic environment, because as we all know, athletics evokes emotions in folks that other things in life don't, right? Whether they're a fan, whether they're a parent, whether they're a player, or whether they're coaching, or whether they're an AD, right? And there's only a few things in life that can trigger people that way, or trigger emotions, whether good, bad, whatever. And athletics is one of them, right? With that, taking that to the table, and then taking the idea of adults that might be very set in their ways, or some adults that are not set in their ways that can be coachable, and figuring all of that out in a school with not a lot of resources. I was the first AD they ever hired. So it was the Wild West before I got there. And then it was like, now I got to bring structures, I got to bring in vision, and I'm not dedicated to one school because I'm on the move every day. But I definitely had a homeschool or two where I had an office. So I was more part of the school culture there because I was in the hallways more, where the other schools I weren't as large. I wasn't there as often. But trying to navigate that was it definitely took me a few years to do. Definitely took me a few years to do. And there was lots of highs and lows there. But I will tell you that turned when I started to build something, and people were like, okay, this guy knows what he's doing. I'm gonna lay off him a little bit. And then when I brought in some coaches, and not to say the coaches I had couldn't coach, they could, but they also weren't hired to be like a varsity boys basketball coach or a varsity girls basketball coach or a varsity girls softball coach. And when I was able to bring in some very like very competitive coaching searches, where I got some very strong candidates that agreed to come work at Perspectives, and one, they came to work at Perspectives, but two, they came to work for me, right? And I told them that. I said, you can come here. There's a lot you're going to tell me you don't have, and I'm going to do my best to get it for you. But you go around this district, you're not going to find an AD that's going to work harder for you than me. And so I said, you could come here and work for me and get that, or you could go somewhere down the street and already have a little bit more, but let's build something here. And I had a couple folks buy into that, right? And they're still friends to this day. I got two of them that coach, two of them coach collegiately, two of them coach division, one coach Division I basketball, another one was in the NBA, right? So there's been some guys that I was able to bring in, and they started with me, and I didn't help them get down there, but I definitely like to show that as an example that we were able to get some good things done, and really help some folks start their career and going from there.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that is one of my colleagues says essentially that your number one job is to be your head coach's lead assistant, right? And make
Yep.
sure that they have what they need. And I think she's done a good job capturing that. Let's talk about the pivot now, right? So you got out of athletic administration, you're
Yep.
still coaching, right? On the
Yep.
side of a bunch of different things, but you made an intentional pivot to get out of the education-based athletic space. Why? Talk
Yeah.
about the challenges, how you would coach others who are maybe on the precipice of, is this really still for me? What does my skill set look like? I've been in education for 25 years. What else is out there? You just
Sure.
help me understand that.
Yeah. So again, for me, it starts with that entrepreneurial spirit with me, stuck with me. So I had that. So I always had that level of kind of moxie and confidence that life after athletic administration or after education, like I'm gonna be good. And I kept some of those things going while I was in AD too. Definitely where it made sense and there wasn't a conflict of interest. I definitely have always been one to have different projects that I'm working on. In terms of folks and why I did it, again, it was wanted to coach my young people, my three children. I wanted to be more involved in their sports lives. And at that time, they were 5, 3, and a newborn when I left being an AD. So that was about the right time. I still miss being an AD a lot, but at the same time, I'm able to be around my kids and their sports activities, and I enjoy that more, which is a very strong statement coming from me for as much as I enjoyed being an athletic administrator. And the other thing too is working in large urban school districts. It's a grind. Any school districts is a grind, but large urban school districts where state funding, local funding on a yearly basis is super volatile. What's the first thing to usually go? Well, if it's not during 8 to 3, it's not a core, right? It's not a core funding priority. That 3 to 6, that well, most people say 3 to 6, but you and I both know it's 3 to 10, right? That 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. That's the first to go. That's where the cuts start. So year on and year out, I'm dealing with that. And so it's tough to be strategic. It's tough to build a long-term plan. It's tough to build facilities. It's tough to just build a program to where we wanted it to go and where I wanted it to go when every year I'm rebuilding the foundation of my home. And so that to me was like, I've done 9 years. I need to start thinking about something else. So that was the impetus for me. And then in doing it, it was depending on how long you're in education or you're in interscholastic athletics or education-based athletics, you have a wealth of knowledge there that you can leverage a lot of different ways, right? Are you going to sell software? Are you going to be a thought leader? Are you going to, be a team sales rep and selling hard goods and soft goods? I mean, there is a wealth of knowledge that you have from doing this job year over year, day over day, but you just have to find those people that see that value the way you know it should be perceived. And then you need to be able to leverage that into something. Could it just be consulting? Sure. I've consulted before. Could it be a full-time job? Yes, but those are hard. Those are really hard because in addition to you getting out, there's a lot of people getting out now. There's a lot of people trying to get out. And I can tell you it's competitive. And even I think the pandemic accelerated a lot of folks leaving the profession just because of those 4 years, however long you want to say the pandemic was, 2 to 4 years, or those changes that we saw that impacted how schools operated, how sports were played, how athletic directors administrated, definitely changed their satisfaction with that job from what I was able to see from an outsider's view or just from talking to colleagues. So I think it's really being thoughtful, using your network. If you think, hey, I got 2 more years, you need to start looking for a job now, right? You need to start looking now. Don't think you're going to retire on July 26th and have a job August 26th. You're not. You're by 26th of the year. So if you're a year away, right, year and a half away. So I think for me, it's you see a lot of them, and I'm sure you see it in your region, Justin, where a lot of retired folks end up jumping out with the vendor and selling part-time or consulting part-time. But I also see a lot of folks leaving the profession earlier than their retirement because they're tired and they want to do something else. Software, hard goods, soft goods, consulting, or a full 180 and into another career or another sector. And that's awesome too, because know that if you were a good AD, you're probably pretty organized. You probably communicate pretty well. You probably take directions relatively well, and you're probably a good leader. Most industries will want someone that can do that, right? So I feel like if you can find something you're passionate about, and then the other word I'll say, and I'll stop talking here, is the transferable skills, which I just mentioned. And you can convey those transferable skills on paper. Hey, AI is helping us all. Use AI to do that, right? It doesn't hurt. And relaying that in a conversation like this, or obviously an interview cycle or networking, whatever it might be, you would hope that would be rise to the top as people evaluate you in terms of what you're looking to do next.
For sure. So on that note, talk a little bit about your projects that you have now pivoted to, right? You don't have to spend a ton of time on Upmetrics.
Sure.
The other things that you're working on that paint a picture of this type of move.
Yeah, so for sure, like you said, Upmetrics, that's managing director there, work with nonprofit organizations, philanthropic organizations, all around helping them use data to get better. I started my own enterprise about the last year of me being an athletic director called Mini Jerseys. Mini jerseys are just as they sound. They're miniature sports jerseys that are great for team awards. So think of rethinking senior night, rethinking your MVP, your most improved, your captain. Instead of giving them a trophy or a plaque or a medal, you can give them a mini jersey with their name, their number. Very cool, very customized. And then we also make those in large quantity as a giveaway. We just did an activation with the Golden State Warriors, which was really cool. They were dropping mini jerseys from the rafters at the Chase Center. People grab them, get their mini jersey, go to the team store, and they got to keep the mini jersey and get a full jersey, which is pretty cool. So yeah, which is a really cool activation. So got that going on. Within mini jerseys too, have some collegiate licenses. So have about 20 licenses for Division One athletic programs: Auburn, Alabama, Kansas, Penn State, University of Illinois, of course, Northern Illinois, Southern Illinois. Can't forget those schools. And with that, we do a lot of NIL work as well. So a lot of our mid-major schools don't have a very structured vendor to do replica jerseys, full replica jerseys, because we also do full-size products too for some of their revenue sports, whether it's football, women's basketball, men's basketball. So at some of those schools, Northern Illinois, Southern Illinois, Loyola Chicago, Northern Arizona, Portland State, Bryant University, hopefully I'm not forgetting anybody. We are a NIL jersey provider for certain teams at those universities as well. And I coach a lot. So coaching, I still think like an AD, so fall, winter, spring. Fall, I'm off. My wife played collegiate soccer at Notre Dame, so she handles all soccer. And that's usually very busy in the fall. And then I'm coaching my kids basketball in the winter, and then a lot of diamond sports in the spring, whether it's baseball or softball. So yeah, that's what I'm doing now. And then on the AD side, it's been a few years, but I still used to go back to the national conference, and I used to be part of a class called LTC 640, role of the urban athletic director. Helped create that class, helped write that class, helped revise that class, taught that class for many years. I'm no longer involved in the day-to-day of that class, but if I'm ever needed to ask, I'll support. But there's some great folks leading that now, and I haven't been an AD for almost 9 school years now. So it's probably good to get some new blood, new voices in there leading that charge. So yeah, that's what I got what I have going on now. So
No tennis for your kids.
so it's interesting. I was about to say that. Yeah, I stopped playing tennis probably for a while. I just stopped. I was yoga, running, working out. Didn't really have anyone in my life that wanted to play, right? And then during the pandemic, one of my neighbors was like, "Hey, let's play." And so him and I started playing a little bit. And then since then, I now play weekly, bi-weekly myself. And I probably play pickleball a good amount. And there's another sport. And I don't know, Justin, what kind of weather you got? I feel like your weather's a little bit more mild than ours, but platform tennis or paddle tennis is something out here in cold weather areas that a lot of folks play in the winter. So that's something I had picked up during the pandemic as well. I've slowed on that. So I'm doing all that. And my kids have sampled all that, except actually they've sampled paddle too. But the one sport that they really enjoy, and it's because of convenience, is pickle. So you could go outside in front of the driveway. We don't have a big driveway, and they're playing pickleball. So it's interesting when I bring up tennis, they would rather play pickleball. But yeah, so just trying to navigate that one. I do think there is some tennis in the future too, as these guys get closer to high school. I might try to encourage that a little bit more. So
There you go. I was laughing because that's what you led with, and then you don't have them playing, which is
yeah,
all good. All
but
right,
yeah,
last question. I'll wrap up, especially as an entrepreneurial guy. I
Yep.
usually ask, what is something you've recently changed your mind on, right? As we think about growth mindset and we think about the world in which we live and how polarized it is and people getting dug in and entrenched in their opinions, right? How are
Sure.
we leading from a place of challenging our own opinions, right? What's something that you've changed your mind on that you used to be dug in over here and now you're over here and it was intentional, and here's why.
Okay, that's a good one. I don't dig in on much, I'll be frank with you. I'm a pretty diplomatic dude, if you could pick up on that. And sometimes people love that, especially in the AD's office. Sometimes people think I'm crazy or they're like, Vinay, take a stance. And I'm more like Switzerland, just trying to make it
Yeah.
work.
As I tell
I
people all the time, the answer is always it depends.
Yes, yeah. And the other thing too, I didn't mention on the pod yet, but is the one thing I learned early as an AD is from a class was you always have time on your side. So you always have time to make that decision. And I think that goes into this statement here. I will tell you this. I think you are never too old to learn something new. I think I'll say that. And I think what I'll tell you now is what I learned this year in the youth sports world. I'm coaching with the basketball organization out here called Breakaway Basketball, which has been a great experience for me this year. Kids have played in the house leagues that they've had for many years, and now my oldest two are kind of not really aged out of the house leagues, but we want a little bit more for them. And so I was able, and they don't usually do this totally often, but I was able to be a parent coach on a couple of their teams, have good relationships with the program, and so they were open to me coming in. And I'm not a head coach, which is different for me. And so I was welcoming that, where I was like, all right, I'm not going to be the head, I'm going to be the assistant. And I'm coaching with two guys that are great, and they have to be both at least 20 years younger than me. So I'll tell you one thing, the first 3 weeks of practice, I didn't say a word. It was a very different way of teaching the game than I have taught it, and how I had learned it. And again, I never coached at a very high level either. So a lot of the youth and rec leagues that I was coaching at, I was coaching the way I learned it when I was middle school and junior high and a little bit into high school. And so for me, it was I'm in these situations where I'm used to being very vocal, having the whistle in my mouth, moving, directing, and this, and you have to be able to read the room, know where you fit in, and know when it's time for you to speak. And so for me, in this journey that I had this season, and it was great. Our season's actually ending this weekend. Really good experience for my kids, hopefully for the guys I coached with, for the kids that we coach, the families. Just reading the room, knowing your role. If you don't have anything to say, that's okay, right? You don't got to just say something to fill up air. Sometimes your presence and your body language can be reassuring for young people enough. And then over time, as you build those relationships, obviously I became more vocal. I became more of a thought partner in what we were doing. But at first, it was like I was learning from the young guys, no doubt about it. Some of these guys weren't born when I was graduated college, right? And it's humbling, but at the same time, I'm sitting there just picking their brain, like, all right, why are we doing this? How are we doing? What foot are we moving with? What are we doing? And they're take their time, they explain it. And so that's been really cool for me. And I think for me, I think for me, it represents a growth mindset because I learned a new way to coach the game. And I'm really excited about it. And I'm already thinking about hopefully next winter, same opportunity is provided to my kids and me, and we can run it back. So,
Love that. It's great when you get to take a back seat a little bit and learn,
yeah,
relearn, challenge some of the things that you've always carried with you.
yeah.
Appreciate that perspective. Anything we missed before we sign off?
No, I think we're good. I appreciate you taking the time and having a very enlightened conversation. So, thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. I'll let you get back to your real calling, which is parenting, coaching,
Yep.
juggling a million different hats.
Yep. No, I appreciate that. Thank you.